Those that study organizational leadership would group leadership types into different categories. The concept of instrumental leadership refers to the person that keeps people on task and who keeps the group members focused on the end goals. Expressive leaders keep the group emotionally and socially cohesive by doing things like offering sympathy or making jokes. Being on track and getting the job done is essential, but the expressive leader is an asset because they maintain group cohesion so members can continue to work together, and it increases harmony and minimizes conflict. Leader styles are also categorized as authoritarian, democratic, or laissez-faire. Authoritarian leaders are those who give orders and expect obedience and compliance. A democratic leader gives the group options and develops a consensus of how to do things, and a laissez-faire leader is highly permissive and unstructured with their guidance to the group. What happens to the individual's behavior in a group? The tendency is to conform to the rest of the group members. In the 1950s, a researcher named Solomon Asch developed an experiment where a group of people were handed cards and told to identify the line on the second card that matched the line on the first card. Pretty obvious, isn't it? The group does this several times, and everyone agrees that the second line matches the first line. As a subject, you would be asked to do this several times, but then the other people in the group start giving the wrong answer. In this experiment, there's only one subject person in the room. So how often were the subjects swayed by the others in the room to give the wrong answer? 33% gave into the group half the time, 40% gave the wrong answer, but not as often, and 25% stuck to their guns and gave the right answer all the time. Stanley Milgram devised an experiment where he tested people's obedience to authority. The experiment focused on the conflict between obedience to authority and personal conscience. His goal was to examine the justifications for acts of genocide and the excuses that were offered by those who were accused at the World War II Nuremberg War criminal trials. The subjects were told to obey an authority figure who instructed them to perform acts that were conflicting with their personal conscience. Participants were led to believe that they were assisting an unrelated experiment in which they had to administer electric shocks to a learner. These fake electric shocks gradually increased to levels that would have been fatal had they been real. The results were upsetting to Milgram, as he found that the majority of people would administer a lethal electric shock. If there was a second teacher in the room, only 5% of the teachers would shock the learner with 450 electrical volts. In this experiment, the experimenter, who's designated by E, orders the teacher, who's designated by T, who is actually the subject of the experiment, to give what the teacher believes are painful electric shocks to the learner, who is actually an actor and a confederate in the experiment. The subject is led to believe that for each wrong answer, the learner was receiving actual electrical shocks, although in reality there were no such punishments. Being separated from the subject, the confederate set up a tape recorder integrated with the electroshock generator, which played pre-recorded sounds for each shock level. The power of the group is profound. As people work together in a collective, they tend to start to employ similar ways of thinking and become tunnel visioned by the perspective. They become convinced there is just one right way to do things and only one single course of action that should be taken. Alternative ideas are thought of as rebellious, and the person that offers these alternative ideas may be thought of as disloyal. When the group thinks it's right, it tends to disregard risk and may suspend moral judgments about the group's actions. One reason that leaders can be subjected to groupthink is that they tend to surround themselves with people that reflect their own values and therefore think like they do. Allowing the freedom of expressing diverse opinions, even when important decisions need to be made, decreases the likelihood of groupthink. So that concludes our chapter on social groups and social networks. We've talked a little bit about bureaucracies, and we've looked at their common dysfunctions. We've also looked at how group size could affect relationships, how group size affects stability, and also the individual behaviors within the groups. And we've looked at a couple of different experiments on group effects on behaviors.